Welcome everyone to the last episode of our Stash Dive knit along. I hope you've been enjoying it so far. I took 2 weeks to finish off the body the last time, and I had a couple of queries with people a little worried that I wasn't going to come back and finish it off, but don't worry, I'm here. It's time to move on to the next section, the sleeves. I just had a few other projects on the go, so I wanted to take my time and make sure that I got the length of the body I wanted. So I'll show you the progress I've made on my body so far. Here we go. It's a fraction longer than I said I was going to go, but not too much longer. And part of that was it grew. Remember the last time I was saying that my neck got bigger? And a big reason for that is my gauge changed quite a bit. And I'm not totally surprised because for me, with fingering weight, because it's very light on your fingers, and as I'm knitting primarily in the round and just stockinette stitch, I don't have to think about it. And the only thing I had to think about was where color changes happened and things like that. And what that means is that I really relax. It's my TV knitting. I'm sitting there and I'm kind of chilling out. And for me, that means my gauge relaxes. It's really common. And I knew it was happening because I could see that it was getting a bit wider than I expected. And I checked the width. And so my gauge started off originally 26 stitches for every 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And it actually changed all the way to 23 stitches per 4 inches. So that's quite a change. However, because of the style of the garment I was doing, I was happy to just let it ride. I said, you know what, I'm actually okay with it a slightly wider. But it meant that I wanted to be careful about the length when I finished. So I kept putting half of it on a second needle and checking the length as I was going, because that was really important to me, that I got the length exactly the way I wanted it. So what that meant, the finished size originally, the width, I had worked on having it about 22 inches wide. So that would be a 44-inch circumference. With that extra change in stitch gauge, it meant that the width was 25 inches wide, so it was a 50-inch circumference. With cropped, that actually works fine. It doesn't cause a problem. It just means it's got a much more kind of sloppy, loose, wavy feel as you wear it. But that's why I ran into the problem with the bigger neck, which I corrected in the last video our previous one, by tightening up the gauge on the neck and doing a wider neck edging. So that straightened the neck out and gave me, it's still a kind of a fairly wide neck, but it doesn't fall off and it feels very comfortable. But the one thing that I do want to be careful with now is the sleeves, because I find that you can get away with a really loose, oversized sweater if it's cropped, because it doesn't end up becoming an enormous amount of fabric, and if you've got well-fitted sleeves. So it was really important to me that I check the gauge before I do the sleeves, so that whatever number of stitches I calculate for the sleeves will take into account the fact that my gauge has changed. So I'm going to be working on a stitch gauge of 23 stitches per inch for my sleeve. My row gauge has stayed the same, which means that I don't need to, I know how many rows roughly I'm going to have on my sleeve. The other thing that's going to change as well is the length of my sleeve, because like if you take a look at the sweater I'm wearing here, it's also oversized. If the body for these drop shoulders, in my case, instead of 22, it'll now be 25 inches wide. So that's an extra 3 inches in the width. So I'm assuming that my sleeve will start 1.5 inches further out here and 1.5 inches further out here. So instead of my 17-inch length sleeve, I'm going to go and work on the assumption that I've got a 15.5-inch sleeve. Now, that may change, and I will know if it's going to change because I can keep checking my length as I'm going through. I'll try my sleeve on and I'll check to see how it's going, and that way I'm not going to get caught with a sleeve that's very long or too short. And by changing frequently, if it seems to be growing a lot faster than expected, I might need to change the stripes, the color stripes, to perhaps start a new one sooner. And I may also want to try and increasing the rate of my decreases so that they happen a little bit sooner. And I want to make sure that I've got a nice snug sleeve as well, because I think a nice, well-fitted, fairly snug sleeve is going to really bring this whole sweater together and stop the whole thing feeling oversized, because I'll have sleeves that are fitting well. So that is my plan. Now, in terms of the colors, I've got my little tray here, if you can see. And what I've done is I've taken all the remaining colors I have and I've divided each of them into 2 balls. The way I did that was I got my electronic scale here, and as I was winding the yarn, I sat the ball on the scale and then I wound it off half of it. So if I had 30 grams left, I would keep winding till there was 15 grams showing on one skein, and so that I'm getting evenly matched balls. The benefit of this, because of the fact that I have so many different colors here, is that I don't have to reserve any for the second sleeve. I know that I can use all of this skein, I can use all of this one, and I can use all of this for one sleeve, because I have the exact same amount left on the other side. So it makes it a lot easier if you pre-prepare all of your colors like that in advance, because you know exactly what you've got and you're working with. What you might also find right now, I was kind of thinking I was going to do, like, you know, the stripes I had where I had one color and then I texture and I had the same, just a single color again. When I broke it down, if you take a look at the blog post, you'll see the image for this. When I calculated it out, leaving 2 inches of ribbing for the cuff in the same ribbing that I've got for that I had for the neck, it'll probably be about 1 inch or so for each of the color stripes. So that's what I'm going to go with. I'm just going to start working, you know, each of those color transitions at about 1 inch a piece. If I find, you know, at the top it's going to be much wider, so I run the risk of running out of yarn sooner, and if that happens, that's fine. Those ones might be a little smaller, and then I can allow some of the further colors down to be a little wider, because there's less stitches, so it's going to go further. Because if you're only knitting 50 stitches instead of 80 stitches down at the cuff, you're going to get half again as much length, because the yarn is going to go further, because the circumference is smaller. So if you run out of yarn in those first few colors, don't panic. Just be aware that you'll probably be able to kind of compensate a little by having some of the stripes down at the end a little bit wider. So that should work okay. Now let me move this stuff out of the way over here, and then I'll show you how I get started with my sleeve. So up here, what I've done is I've taken the first color I wanted to work, and I started picking up stitches. This is one of the armhole openings. I didn't block it, but you might find that you find it a little bit easier if you pre-block, just with the steam or something, just to try and prevent the rolling. It didn't really bother me, so I just went with it. I'm using this one is, I think it's 32 inches long. It might possibly be 40, but I think it's 32. And I'm going to do the magic loop method. And I picked up, for my size, I'm going to go with 88 stitches for my sleeve. So this is the top of the sleeve here. I picked up 44 up to the top, and then I swapped around to the second side of the magic loop and I picked up another 44 stitches. I haven't quite come down to the end here because I was just going to show you the last couple down there. Now what I'm also going to go and do is I will you need to kind of keep an eye on where you're picking them up. If I stretch this out here, you can see the stitches are all picked up right along that same column of stitches. And that is really important because it gives you a lovely crisp pickup line for the top of your sleeve. Because if you end up like dropping accidentally down here with one and then coming back up, the edge of your pickup will look really higgledy-piggledy. So I'm just going to slide my way down here, and I had 4 stitches left to pick up, so I was going to show you how I went about doing that. So this row of stitches here, just one in, is where I was picking up. So I'm trying to pick up 4 to the end here. What seemed to work pretty well for me is picking up 3 stitches, skipping a row, and then picking up another 3 seemed to give me the right ratio. But depending on your gauge, that may be a little different. So I've come to the one, this was the last space I picked up. Just about to skip one and then go in here into the same row of knitting in here. Wrap it, and then I kind of use this second section of knitting as I use my hand as a needle to a certain extent. So that's 1, going into the same one here, 2, going to move down here a knittle, do 3, and then the last one, I'm kind of coming down to the bottom. I think I might jump down just to go into here to try and avoid having a gap 4. So that's brought me right back down to the underarm. You can also use, if you prefer double pointed needles or small circular needle or anything like that, they will all work just fine. I'll give a link for other methods you can use. Magic loop tends to be my favorite. See, these are all of the change color yarns. I've just left them all in there, just kind of stuff them all in, and you can come back afterwards to weave them in. You'll have a nice little edge here where you picked up stitches to kind of weave all of those loose edges in. When you get started here on the magic loop, you're just going to join in the round and start knitting your way around here. So all you will do is you're going to knit in the round for several rounds, just like this. Now, for my size, I have decided the top part is going to be the 88 stitches, and I calculated at the cuff then I'm going to bring it down to about 52 stitches. Whatever number of stitches you have for the cuff, make sure you have the right multiple for whatever stitch pattern you're going to work. In my case, I'm doing a knit 2 purl 2 stitch pattern, which means I need a multiple of 4 stitches. So 52 was the closest multiple of 4 I had, so that's where I'm going to go. So then to decide how you decrease, you're going to take the first stitches, which are 88, take 52 away from it, and I will get 36 stitches. So that's how many stitches you want to decrease in total. But when you have a decrease round, you're going to decrease 2 stitches on that round. So to know how many decrease rounds, you'll take the total number of decreases, which is your 36, divide it by 2, and you'll get 18. So I will have 18 decrease rounds. So that tells me how many times I have to do a decrease round. Then the next thing you want to figure out is, where do I space these? So what the easiest way of doing it is, you've got my total length, we were saying, is going to be 15.5 inches long. But you're not going to have any decreases in your cuff, which is 2 inches. And I usually try to have maybe another inch to allow for differences in length, so your gauge changed a little, where I won't have any. So I'll take the 15.5, take 3.5 inches off it, and you're going to have 12.5 inches. Now, then I went and multiplied that by my row gauge, which, if I remember offhand, I think it was 32 rows per inch, but that will be in the blog post just to be sure. And then what I divided that in, and it gave me, multiplied it out to see how many rows I had to do my decreases in, and it came out at 100 rows. So I'll divide 100 by 18, which was the amount of times I need to work a decrease round. And it came out 5.5. So you can't do 5.5 every 5.5 rounds. But what you can do is 1 decrease round every 5th and 1 every 6th. The 2 of those put together will give you 5.5. So what it will mean is I'll have half of those, which is 9, half of 18 is 9, and 9 decrease rounds every 6th round, and 9 decrease rounds every 5th round. And that should bring me to the right length. But that's something, again, that you can just keep checking your length. And if you find that your gauge is changing, that you're using more or you're using less rows, and so that you're not getting the decreases in time, start speeding up the rate of the decrease. Or you might find that it's getting too tight, in which case you'll stop the decreases sooner. So keep trying it on and keep checking, and don't be afraid to kind of change that stuff around, because when you go from a very large circumference to a small one, like the sleeve, your gauge will tighten. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if my gauge ended up tightening up a little bit again and I didn't have to work anywhere near as many decrease rounds as I thought I did. So I'm going to play that one by ear, and in a few weeks' time, I'm going to go and I'll do one more video and I'll let you know if I had to make any more changes on the sleeves as I went down. So the next thing that I'm going to show you, because after that, you pretty much got everything that you know that you're going to need to do. And the only thing that we haven't shown is how you work a sleeve decrease round. So when I do a sleeve decrease round, I'm going to want to do a decrease at near the start and near the end. Now you can kind of alternate back and forth. I'm going to show you, as in which goes first and which goes at the end. You're trying to just kind of slant them towards the center. So if you're coming along this side, SSK is going to be the one that will slope to the left. Knit two together will slope to the right. So typically you're going to do a knit two together as the first one and then an SSK at the end. But you can mix it around and change the decrease direction if you want. Just keep it consistent. So I'll just show you what that will look like here on your decrease round. I'm going to unpick the first couple of ones here, because now you would not be doing this obviously on the very first one, because in that case you're going to have worked 5 rounds straight first of all and then your decrease round. But we're going to pretend that we've done a couple of rounds already. So then we're coming to the decrease round. You'll have knit 2 and then I'll do a knit 2 together. And then I'm just going to happily knit all the way over to the side. With magic loop, I always feel like what you're actually doing is just knitting 2 straight rows of knitting, because you're knitting all the way up this side and then you swing your way around and you're knitting the other side. And the reason it works is this half on this side is on nice straight needles, but so that it's allowed to curve into a circle, the second half on the other side is on the actual cord, which means that it's flexible and it can move around and it can do whatever it wants. With magic loop as well, what you'll discover is you don't need a stitch marker for the end of it usually, because where you have put the cord break in is a fairly natural break. If you're doing double pointed needles and you're kind of moving where the position is, or if you're doing a small circular, you're going to need a stitch marker to indicate the start of the round. But for magic loop, because there's a natural division there, you're not going to need that. So that's the first half done. Now I'm going to slide this over to the second half, and always make sure your yarn is coming from the top, because if you bring it from the wrong side, you'll end up creating a loop and adding an extra stitch. It's often one of the biggest problems people have when they're learning magic loop, is bringing the yarn from the wrong side, creating a yarn over, and then having an extra stitch right at the beginning of the loop. Or if you're finding you're getting a ladder, this cord might be long enough, not be long enough, in which case it's really pulling apart, or you might not have a cord that's flexible enough. These ones are the Haya ones, and they've got a nice soft cord. So it behaves very nicely when you're trying to do magic loop. I find them particularly good. And I do try to have super long cords. You can see how huge the loops are on each end here. All right, I'm nearly at the point where I can show you that second decrease. What I find, maybe it happens to you as well, when you're decreasing round and round like this, it's really easy to miss decreases. So if you end up forgetting it, I usually just add it in on the next round once I realize, whoop, better slow down. To match up, we want to stop at the last 4 stitches, and we'll decrease these 2, and then we'll have 2 at the edge. So the first one I did was the knit 2 together. So the next one I'll do will be a slip and knit. So slip it knitwise, slip it knitwise, put this needle into the front. And so it's the same as putting this one into the back and knitting them through the back loops together. Give it a nice little tug, because it's very easy, because you've been maneuvering stitches. you can get stitch, you've let the yarn relax, and so you end up with loose stitches on each side. So that's the very beginning of my sleeve. So I'm going to have quite a bit of work ahead of me now over the next several weeks, working on both sleeves. So probably in another 2-3 weeks time, I might pop in and I'll stick another video up, a shorter one this time, just showing you the finished sweater and telling you about any kind of things I ran into when I was working the sleeve and any pitfalls. Please keep sharing all of the photographs online with me with the hashtag Carol Feller. What was it? Carol Feller Stash Knit Along. And that way, because particularly on Instagram, I'm following that tag. So whenever you tag something with that, or even tag it with Carol Feller, it'll pop up in my feed and I get to share it. There's been a few ones where people have done some, pulled in new stitch patterns and just used the basic shape, and they're just phenomenal. So keep sharing so that I can share onwards with the wider world. And I'm delighted that all of you are enjoying this whole Stash Dive Knit Along as much as I am.